I'll just say procedurally, her presentation, and then the committee, which is, I think, myself, Paul, and Eli, will ask questions, and then it's opened up to the audience as you are. So, take it away.
Cool. Thank you guys all for being here. Housekeeping also that I wanted to mention, there's going to be pictures of BSER, and I'll talk about the park fire at the very end just a little bit. So if you need to take a moment, go outside, that's totally okay with me. So this is a presentation on my master's project, which was writing a land stewardship guide for landowners in the foothills of California. Doesn't want to work. Okay, overview of this presentation. So we kind of started with an introduction, and then we're going to go into kind of the purpose of this project and why we decided to write such a guide. And then we'll talk about the inspirations behind the guide and what really was like the catalyst to writing it. And then we talk about the literature review. So also a little housekeeping. This presentation is mainly on the paper that I wrote that is about the guide. So we'll talk about the guide too, but it's also mainly the paper. So we'll talk about the literature review, the methods to writing the guide, the results, which is the guide, and then we'll conclude, and I'll end it with some recommendations for the future. Okay, purpose. Landowners in the foothills of California face significant challenges in managing their land. Many lack background in land management, stewardship, or restoration, leading to difficulties in effective decision-making and resource management. However, in the face of changing climate and historic wildfires, landowners need solutions, insight, and inspiration. So, as we all know, this is an unprecedented time, as it seems like it has been for the last many years. So that was kind of the background of this, is we felt like a lot of agencies and groups have the support and the knowledge, but our local landowners are missing that background, and they're an important part of this picture. Okay, inspiration. So the first kind of big inspiration is the reserve. As many of you know, you've all pretty much been there once or twice. So it's a very diverse landscape just north of Chico in our little canyon. And over the past 20-some years, we've had so many land stewards taking care of the place, learning from the place, doing all these experiments, trying to figure out what is kind of our best options for the future and how to manage. And a lot of people are really interested in the work being done at BSER. So that was kind of the first inspiration, is getting that work and that knowledge out to other people. Then we have the Grumpy Bear Guide to Playing God, which was written by Paul Maslin. Many of you know. So this guide was essentially it was given to every land steward when they started. And it was kind of based very specifically for BSER land stewards. And so Paul, I think, came to Eli wanting to expand this, not just for the BSER land stewards, but for everybody. So it was a little more comprehensive, maybe brought back some of that ecological knowledge, setting a baseline. So in the guide, we actually adapted a lot of the Grumpy Bear Guide to Playing God, and I'll talk about that in the methods, but it's still in there. It's just a little different. And then, like I said before, the private landowners. So as we all know, fires don't stop at a property line, water doesn't stop at a property line, wildlife doesn't really stop at a property line, and so stewardship shouldn't stop at a property line. So that's their knowledge and their help in this big part of it all was another inspiration. Now the literature review. So the literature review is kind of long, so I try to summarize like the interesting points, but also the why to doing this. So first of all, climate change in California. So this was a 2016 study, so it's already increased since then, but in California alone, we've seen a 1.9 degrees Celsius increase in our average temperature since the 20th century. And we're predicted to have a 2 degrees Celsius increase by the end of the 21st century. And I mean, I think we can all agree that we're already feeling some of those impacts, so obviously any more is going to be catastrophic. So it's, again, unprecedented time, it's time to act. And then kind of going off this, the state has committed to conserving 30% of its landscape by 2020, or 30, which is often called 30 by 30. 30 by 30 has a longer history, but in California, this is something we're kind of starting and getting the move on. But not all of California's landscape is in public ownership or even private, but like conservation ownership. So private landowners need to be part of this 30% in order to reach our goals. And then a good piece of news, again, a 2016 study, so might have changed a little bit, but 30% of California species are threatened with extinction. However, only 0.3% have actually gone extinct globally. So that means that a lot of California's native flora, fauna, and wildlife are still very intact, and we have an opportunity to still bring them back and do the work to have a more resilient landscape. And then that kind of brings us into land-based measures. Landowners don't have all the resources that our agencies have. So we had to come up with cost-effective and holistic management ideas that were able for any landowner with a basic background to do. So that's kind of why land-based measures. All right, more literature review. So as I alluded to, the California foothills are very diverse, one of the most diverse places in the world. So in our little foothill ecosystems, we have meadows, oak woodlands, savannas, chaparral, riparian corridors, mixed oak and conifer forests. And then again, just to kind of point to the why of these places are so important, or why private landowners need to be involved in them. 80% of our oak woodlands and meadows are privately owned. So again, going back to that 30 by 30, if 20% are publicly owned, in order to get to 30% of meadow and oak conservation, we need at least 10% of landowners to be part of this. For riparian ecosystems, they're considered a hotspot for biodiversity. I think we can all see that even just in the big Chico Creek Canyon, but in any riparian ecosystem. But they're also some of the most endangered ecosystems globally. And humans have a huge impact on our riparian ecosystems because we need water too, so we're all in them. And then chaparral is one of the most extensive vegetation types in the state. So if 80% of oak woodlands are privately owned, you can just imagine one of our most extensive vegetation types, how many private landowners are part of that. And then these landscapes have been historically low lighting ignition frequency, and human activity has been the dominant source of ignition. So humans have always been a part of chaparral. We've always been part of its stewardship, and in recent years we've been lacking from the stewardship of chaparral. So that is another reason we need to get back in there and starting to get landowners involved. And then just a little bit of the summary of the other parts of the literature review. So we talked about drought, climate change a little bit, but we've already seen an unprecedented drought, and it's likely that conditions are going to continue to get worse as climate change continues. And then human water use is increasing globally as well. But there are solutions. In looking through literature, we found that beaver dam analogs or BDAs, fuel reduction, or even invasive species removal all had impacts on increasing groundwater in their local ecosystem. So there are things that landowners can do that are kind of simple that can increase the available water locally. And then invasive species. So when European and Spanish settlers came to this valley and area, there was obviously a huge exploitation of resources and people, but they also brought with them invasive species. Part of that was on purpose, things that they wanted, but some of that was accidental. But on top of that, then they banned cultural practices, a lot of which, like prescribed fire, would have probably kept some of these invasive species at bay, but with the lack of that human stewardship, they have taken over a lot of our landscapes. In reading literature, we found that prevention is obviously the most successful and cost-effective way to fight invasive species. And prevention can be really simple too, just cleaning your boots, cleaning your cars, things like that. So we emphasize that in the guide, but we also realize that it's not as realistic. There's invasive species everywhere. So there's other management options. There's weeding, there's goading, there's grazing, there's prescribed fire. So we also provide those options in the guide for the land managers and private landowners. And then fire in California. I think this is all, we're very aware of this, but fire has always been a part of California's history. And part of that is due to the indigenous people who were setting fires in California. Since the banning of cultural practices and just the loss of indigenous knowledge of people, we've seen an increase in large, catastrophic, high-intensity wildfire. That also has to do with our suppression tactics and the way we've managed fire in the last 100 years. So this not only is just detrimental to our landscape, but it releases a large amount of carbon every time one of these fires happen. And that further contributes to climate change and this cycle that is causing these catastrophic fires. But the exciting news is community-led fire is getting more and more productive, it is happening more and more, and one study found that landowners who were part of PDAs were 6 to 10 times more likely to have used fire on their land compared to other landowners who were not. So this kind of just speaks to the proof that when we have community and when we reach out to these landowners, they are willing to do the work, they are willing to bring fire onto their properties and things like that. They just need to be engaged. Okay, I think that's it for the overview. So methods. So the first part was kind of bringing together all that literature. So I sat down for my paper and really combed through the literature, but I also made sure my literature review chapters kind of coincided with the chapters we wanted for the guide. So those chapters were a preface and an introduction, kind of to me and Paul and the Beezer, but also to what stewardship looks like and is and what it means to be a steward. And then we kind of go over objectives for creating climate resilient landscapes, which were essentially increasing available water, storing carbon, and creating more biodiversity, all things that we've highlighted in the literature review. They were big topics there, but they were also big topics between Paul, Don, and I's discussions about what land stewardship means. Then, after kind of setting that baseline for the landowners, we go into stewardship in the California foothill ecosystems. So essentially, that was all the different ecosystems I mentioned earlier, the oak woodlands and meadows, chaparral, riparian, and mixed conifer. And we talk about stewardship in those ecosystems very specifically. And then in that same little section of it, I also talk about water stewardship, invasive species management, trails and road maintenance, things that kind of cross those boundaries of ecosystems but are still important. And then we kind of have a closing of the guide, which is bringing it all together. And that's where a lot of the Grumpy Bear guide to playing God kind of comes in and is brought back into this new guidebook that we created. Then the other half of my methods was spending 8+ days with Paul in the field. So this was fun. We kind of made every single day different. We tried to, at least. Some days were the same, but every day we would go out based on seasonality, weather, things that just needed to be done, and kind of pick our day. And then we would go through the day. Paul would usually kind of explain what we were doing or why we were doing it. We would talk about it a little bit. For things I had never done, he would maybe like give me an example, or we would kind of do it together, walk through it together, and then we'd spend the rest of the day doing that work ourselves. So this allowed me to kind of be like as in the mind of a landowner and kind of understand what their questions might have been and what are the things that are really important to know about doing these kind of stewardship techniques. And then some days we also got lucky and new land stewards got to go with us, or the California Conservation Corps got to go with Paul and I. And so that was another chance for us to kind of teach one and then, write about it later. So that was exciting. And then I also went to plenty other field days and trainings. As you guys all know, I was a land steward for Beezer for the last 2.5 years as well. So during that time, there's not a day you don't learn something in the field. So those experiences and teachings also kind of made their way into the guide one way or another. And then Dawn and I went to trainings. I went to a training with the Sierra Fund on Beaver Dam analog. So all those things kind of played into the guide. Even if it was just a picture, they still had kind of an impact. I had the results. So this is just the front page. And we kept it we, as in me, kept it pretty basic, just mainly because it was more important to me and my committee to just get the words out and the knowledge out, and then we can work on essentially making it a prettier, nicer guide later on. That's maybe a fun project for someone who does design. So this is kind of the start, and you can see all the different chapters that we had. And this is a good time to mention that somewhere there's QR codes floating around. Take a picture of those, it'll open up the guidebook for you, and you can see it there. But we're also hoping to put it online. Eli and I have discussed putting this on the BESER website, but Paul has recently, with Gary's help, kind of made a website of his own that is quite pretty. So that's another option that we can look into, is just creating a website for the guide. Here's just another example. This is the wildlife chapter, kind of what it looks like. So this one's a little bit different, but usually I would introduce kind of why that was important, and then we would talk about some of the problems and solutions in that ecosystem type. For this one, it's wildlife, so it's a little different. And then, like, this is an example of a case study of habitat piles and how you might make one and what that would look like. And then I try to add pictures whenever I had them for that. Okay, conclusion. So this project serves as a critical resource for landowners in the California foothills. This land stewardship guide gives landowners practical knowledge to enhance carbon and water storage, increase biodiversity, and fire resilience. These stewardship practices will be beneficial to landowners, but will also contribute to broader ecosystem resilience, which ties to there's no boundary to stewardship. Lastly, Land Stewardship Guide will be available at a critical time, which now it feels more critical than ever, giving landowners a chance to make a difference in the face of climate change. And then talk about recommendations a little bit. So I kind of started to get into this, but we want it to be a living document. There's definitely things we're going to learn. There's always things we're going to learn. I already have edits that I want to make to the guide. So it's important that as new research becomes available, as new science becomes available, we're able to give those landowners still accurate information. And then that also provides the opportunity to expand on all of the chapters. So again, I kind of set the baseline for stewardship in those ecosystems, but someone could easily take that ecosystem and write a whole chapter book on just that stewardship in riparian ecosystems, for example. So I think that would be really excellent. Hope someone goes ahead and does that. And then virtual platform, we talked about having it on BESER website, but also having a website of its own. This would help make it a living document. I think on an online platform, it's just a lot easier to edit and change as things change. And then lastly, with the park fire, there's obviously going to be lessons learned. We're going to learn probably a lot from this fire. So I'm hoping that that can be integrated throughout these chapters as we learn more. And then I think BESER has spent a lot of time being proactive, which is really great, but now we have to be a little bit reactive. And that is not something I have highlighted in the guide. It was really how to recover from a fire like this. So now we have the chance to learn and do it. So that can be added to the guide as well. Time for questions. Thank you all.
Eli or Paul, do you want to start off with questions?
Oh, it's fine on me. I guess that first and foremost, thank you, Olivia, for this. I mean, this is something that I've wanted to see happen for a number of years. As we all know, I've spent time with Paul. He's a wealth of knowledge, and he's retired from having to write things down like for his job. So I appreciate somebody hanging out with and capturing some of that knowledge.
Yeah.
This is Blue Oak study. It's really good too. But this is important work where we can take this and take like the Gulf Bears guide and this. And these are things that I see all future land stewards, but also neighbors and other property owners getting access to and through our partners. So really appreciate it. I was planning on reading it thoroughly at the end of last week. That didn't happen, but I'm looking forward to diving into it a little bit more. And, yeah, I don't have a question right now. I just really appreciate you getting this across the finish line. It's perfect time.
Once upon a time, you talked about kind of subdividing it, making one for the seed, one for the land stewards, one for the neighbors. Any action on that, or still thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now I've kind of gone in the direction of just a baseline that anybody could use, you know? But I think that would be an important thing, is to adapt it specifically. Again, like this, I really kind of get into some basic ecology that I think a lot of land stewards probably have a good grasp on, and they don't necessarily need this guide. But someone could, or myself, could take it one day and make it more advanced for those land stewards who are have already understood what's in the guide and go a step further. And then same for the Cs. I think this could work for the Cs fairly well. And then, yeah, for landowners, again, there could always be expansion, yes.
I do have a question. This, so we put on a website, turn in a list, but I also like that it's Google Doc right now too, for edits. So it sounds like something that we could additionally make copies, adapt. And I would suggest that it isn't you unless it's for your job. With the tribe supports that, I support it. But yeah, I look forward to having others take the lead and help use this as a baseline.
So in the future, you're in a position now working in a tribal position to have a logical reserve. I think there's a chance of kind of matching some traditional ecological knowledge in this whole thing, and expanding and going in various directions.
Yeah. That's something I remember, Dawn. I had like the first week, I think we talked about this. Obviously, I'm not native, I'm not part of that community, so I didn't want, although a lot of these stewardship techniques are still inspired by or drawn from traditional knowledge, it was not my place to write it, but absolutely somebody could take this to the next level from the tribal community and turn it in to more of a stewardship guide for native communities, and then spread it through in that community because they're also lacking that knowledge in a lot of ways. So yes, and I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a master management plan that we're putting together with Wildlife Conservation Board that I think is going to incorporate some of these, whether it's like in support of appendices, and with that we're also partnering with the Chico tribe as they're developing their management plan. So I think that at minimum this is going to be something that we're going to mine from as we're developing the large landscape plan partnership with us and the tribe area.
I'm a little bit concerned that this is coming out too late. The mother had an expression, shutting the barn door after the horses run away. With the megafires and so on, are there going to be local landowners who are stewardshiping their land?
I think we have Force Ranch still left, and so hopefully they can get on it and start doing work. But yeah, I had that thought too. Yeah.
I would counter that in some respects in that the opportunity is there, and I think Olivia has kind of pointed that, you know, like we're going to learn from what has been done, and it can be applied in any situation.
Yeah.
I'll ask maybe a question that's on my mind, and then we can still kind of go on some committee until we're ready to go to the general audience. But you know, obviously, the park fire has created some new thoughts and questions in our own minds about this. In one element of it, what is floating in my mind at the moment is, you know, the adaptability of like what has been successful. And these are things we're going to learn, right?
Yeah.
But you know, in terms of what do you see as the adaptability with climate change, because we talk about climate change in here, and a lot of these are very specific climate solutions. But what do you see are some of the biggest needs for us in stewardship, and how do we scale?
Yeah.
Those like two parts of the question.
Yeah. So biggest needs, I think, we're like trying to kind of counteract climate change is the carbon drawdown and increasing water and biodiversity, right? So those are kind of like proactive And then with climate change, it's coming at us slowly, although it feels kind of quick. So it's going to be harder to make those predictions, I feel like. But I think with new research and exciting things that are happening with the reserve, we can start to kind of build that into the guide. And I'm hoping that a lot of these things that we talk about in the guide will still hold true. I think, prescribed fire is still going to hold true even with climate change. I think anything we do to put water back in the soil and increase our soil health is still going to be relevant in climate change. And then as far as scalability, I think we started at a very small scale because I'm thinking single landowner has never done this before scale. But I think a lot of what I stole was from the BSERV, and that's already at a larger scale. So we know it's scalable by 10 because we've seen 10 people do it or more, and I think we can continue to do that. Some of them, prescribed fires, it will be harder to scale, but it obviously can be done on a bigger scale. Some of the little things like BDAs, those are small little individual acts, but can be done throughout entire watersheds. So I think the scalability is there. You just have to be a little bit creative. Yeah.
Another thought that's floated to my mind is obviously we're sitting here in a room filled with folks who've engaged in land stewardship, and they haven't read the guide. Some of them had the opportunity to go out with Paul and had classes with some of us talk about and learn about these things. But what do you see as in terms of the opportunities for education, direct education around this?
Yeah, I think we could do, a full community outreach and really teaching courses. I think Paul and I actually talked about this once. It's having people at the reserve and after I went to the Beaver Dam analog building course with the Sierra Fund, I was like, we could do this. A bunch of people were coming from all over to learn about that very specific type of stewardship, so why not have people at larger scales in classrooms and things like that. And then, as people read it, I hope it's a living doc, so then as people know more, we can edit and expand it that way as well. But whole social media campaign, all that would be great.
You mentioned, obviously, I'll call it post-disaster recovery. It could be a flood, could be anything, right? Obviously, it's one of the missing pieces. But is there anything else, as you stand there now in retrospect, what's happening right now, that's on your mind?
Throughout it, there was 100 things I wanted to add, and I had to eventually just stop myself and finish it so that people could read it. I think it's hard to say. There's lots of little things, and again, just back to it was a baseline, and I feel like there could be a more advanced version. And a lot of it, we just built the base, but I would like to know more, and I think a lot of people in this room would want that second step as well.
It has me just thinking about an opportunity maybe in the living document to have a parking lot of ideas and questions that we and others can add to, and maybe some others have a solution that works for them that they can add to it.
I would like it.
Yeah.
Get part of the website.
I'm done with mine. Paul,
Did you keep a list of the 100 extra things you might have?
Yeah, they're in 5 different notebooks strewn about and sticky notes, but they're there. Yeah.
Might make a nice appendix.
Yeah. Agreed.
Paul or Eli, is there anything else you want to ask? So why don't we then go to
one suggestion for how to organize all of those? Write and revise table of contents. Just put those topics where, and again, they don't have to be the final revised table of contents, but it's a nice way to organize. I thought about this. Here's a chapter I didn't even think about, or a section I didn't even think about. But it'll be easy.
Yeah.
You don't have to do much really any more writing.
Right.
You just capture the ideas in a really succinct way.
I think that would be great. Yes.
So you talked about the popularity of the prescribed burn associations. Do you think that there could be a bridge between your document and educating those people as well, beyond just the title?
Yeah, so the PBA has a nice little guide of their own. And I think we already work really well together, and there's no reason that they couldn't spread this guy through their communities that they reached out to. I think it would be a great way to have kind of a campaign of getting it out. Yeah. How does that work?
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. I guess there's other fires. There's another fire called the Lake Fire. Maybe you know about it. I think it's Santa Barbara County. I think it has affected or is affecting the Sedgwick Reserve, which is part of the UC Natural Reserve System. Maybe you know all this. I just wonder how much coordination or communication there is between the staffs of various reserves regarding these kinds of problems.
I don't know that there's a ton. I know once, Rihanna, you had someone reach out, maybe from Cal Poly, I can't remember, asking about some of these things.
We want to Swanton.
Yeah.
And it's the Swanton Pacific grant. But that's also because we know each other.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is by like just our friendships, relationships that happen through the PBA, through school, through, I don't know, friends of friends. Our network is, natural resources in California is fairly small, and we all tend to like each other because we all do the same thing and we're passionate about the same thing. Doesn't mean that we can't engage that network better in the future, and I think we definitely should. Honestly, through this master's program, we've been able to, grab onto Pepperwood Preserve and a couple other preserves that we wouldn't have been able to before, or we just didn't know the right contacts. And we're all incredibly busy people out in the woods, so it is hard to grab these other people for a moment just to talk sometimes. But I think there can be that for sure.
I think a collaborative effort would be great, because there's obviously going to be learned knowledge. We know there was learned knowledge from BSER that we wanted to capture that we knew was nowhere else. And so I'm sure that that exists in these other reserves, and it should be captured through them as well. Yeah.
I see the California Biodiversity Network being a good hub for a lot of that, particularly with the Stewardship Roundtable. Now, we need to come to these meetings.
Yeah.
But they're virtual, so but I would also say like the UCs up until more recently have been mostly focused on the research aspect of those lands, and lesser on the stewardship aspect, which now they're starting to want that more of. So they're looking to us, which is pretty cool. Good.
I'm wondering how this process has shifted your views on land stewardship in our area, and also if you found anything that surprised you in this process.
Yeah, I mean, I think I came to Chico having really never been here much at all before. I think I did come once. So there's a lot that I learned about the foothill ecosystems that I had no concept of. So it shifted my entire, obviously, thoughts on stewardship, and it's, been very exciting to learn so much. I think as far as like speaking to what was super exciting, I think obviously prescribed fire, once you've done it and seen it, it's very exciting. And then seeing the results, and I'm hoping after this fire we'll be a little bit surprised or get to see the exciting things that we hopefully expected to see. So I'm excited for those. I'm hoping to see good things from our good work.
I had a question, Olivia. So you mentioned before during your lit review about Native Americans in California being the original stewards of land, some laws that stop cultural practices such as cultural farming, but you didn't go in depth into TEK because you didn't you wanted that to come from the community, not from yourself. And I haven't read your paper, but in the community outreach section, which I saw in the little index, is there a section on tribal outreach and maybe using the BSER as a case study on this is how a nonprofit landowner was able to reach out to a local tribe, and maybe using Loomis Caltrex as a case study, because last Loomis Caltrex they had Isabel Rancheria, Great Ball Rancheria, and Mountain Biking Consortium. About 20-25% of the attendees were Native American, and we're all learning together on how to do land stewardship and keep and whatnot.
Yeah. Great thought. So since it was for landowners, kind of I was thinking like single, home, I included indigenous texts that I thought were good, like Basic Grass or Tending the Wild, for them to read. And I kind of pointed them, and different parts of the guide I would kind of nod to and point people in that way. necessarily say exactly what stewardship looked like. So it's a little bit there, but I like the way you're thinking, and I think if we adapt the guide to be like for landowners, for reserves, for the seas, if we have a land manager for the more advanced version, yes, that would be an excellent chapter, I think, because now having worked in the tribal position, it definitely is a struggle with people reaching out to us in inappropriate ways or not reaching out at all or building that communication. So I think that would be extremely helpful for all tribes. Yeah.
I'll ask a question.
Hi, Gary.
You said you work 80 plus days with the small.
Rough math. Yeah.
Which one was your favorite day?
It's hard to say. I think Paul would agree. It was very, very cool when we saw 2 baby mountain lions one day and didn't get eaten alive. That would be maybe one of my favorite moments, but there was a lot of good days.
Olivia,
Yeah.
I heard you say you saw 2 big mountain lions, so you're saying that Mama was somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Just watching
Yes,
you watch them.
we didn't see her, but we knew she was around. But luckily we were in the Kubota UTV, so we kind of just stared at them, stared at each other, and then went really fast. And then every time we passed over that little area, I think we both were expecting them to be there again and never got to see them again. It's kind of a bummer, but yeah. I hope to never see them again because the next time will be my last.
How many grumpy days?
There were some grumpy days, but we got through it, I think. Yeah.
I was going to ask how you survived.
I think the first week, or two, Paul, had to test me out, make sure I was going to stick to this. But then once we figured out we were in it together, it was less grumpy.
Well, barring any further questions, I think that wraps it up, eh? Yeah.
And so I know that Mitch sent something out as well,
Yes.
but the committee's going to meet in here. You can either wait in the hall or we can come to you.